What if the person everyone feared was the only one brave enough to show mercy? In the dead of a Rocky Mountain winter, a grieving man shelters a wounded stranger and sets off a chain of choices that could cost them everything. Stay with us, because this isn't just a story of survival. It's a story of what it truly means to be human. The snow fell in silence, thick and slow, like the world had forgotten how to breathe. In Vail, Colorado, winter didn't arrive, it settled, crept in through the bones of the Rockies and made itself at home. On that particular morning, the sky hung heavy with steel-gray clouds, and the cold bit through even the thickest wool. The depot sat quiet under a thin veil of frost, and the townspeople moved like shadows, avoiding eye contact, avoiding memories. It was the kind of morning that made you believe something was coming, something you wouldn't understand until it was already standing on your doorstep. Samuel Callahan stepped off the freight car like a ghost returning to the place that had once buried him. He moved with the deliberate slowness of a man too big for fast decisions, too haunted for sudden motion. His coat, worn thin at the elbows, carried the dust and chill of 3 counties, and his wide-brimmed hat sagged with snow and time. Over one shoulder he slung a wooden crate of dry goods, over the other a coiled rope. Practical things. Things that made sense in a world that didn't anymore. No one welcomed him. No one looked up from their boots or from the steam rising off their breath. He was used to that, preferred it even. Solitude suited a man who knew the shape of grief by heart. But as he passed the end of the platform, something made him stop. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't even a movement. It was stillness, an unnatural stillness that pricked his skin like the first shiver before a fever. There, wedged between 2 supply crates where the wall of the depot met the frozen ground, was a shape. Human. Small. Unmoving. A woman. He saw the blood first, black and red smeared across snow like a warning. Her hair was long, thick black as coal crusted in blood and frost. She wore no coat, only a wool shawl that had frozen stiff around her shoulders. Her leggings were torn. One hand clutched her thigh, dark blood soaking through. The other hand, palm down in the snow, trembled. She was dying. From the door of the station, Grady, the railman, spat and called out like he was discussing a broken crate. Found her last night. Apache or something. Limped in from the ridge, maybe. Folks say she stole from a rancher up north. Either way, she ain't ours. Samuel didn't answer. He walked to her slowly, snow creaking beneath his boots, and knelt beside her. She didn't look at him, not at first. But when she did, her eyes opened slowly, dark wild and too tired to plead. Eyes like the back end of a storm. She stared at him, not like she needed help, but like she dared him to offer it. Grady barked again. "You don't want to touch that trouble, Callahan. Our folks don't like what they don't understand." Samuel reached out and touched her cheek, cold. So cold it made his chest ache. Her lips were cracked and frozen. Blood had dried in streaks beneath her nose. Her breath was shallow, each one like a coin tossed into a dry well. Without a word, Samuel slipped his arms beneath her and lifted her from the snow. Not gently, not roughly, just firmly, like he'd already made peace with what came next. Grady stammered behind him. Sheriff'll want to know Samuel didn't turn, he didn't slow. His boots thudded down the platform. "She's someone not dying today," he said. He walked through the storm, the woman limp in his arms. Wind sliced through the folds of his coat, and the snow blew sideways like it was trying to erase his footprints as he made them. She stirred once, barely, and whispered something he couldn't understand. Her voice was soft, tired, carrying a language older than the town that had cast her aside. His horse waited in the trees beyond the depot. Samuel tied the crate to the back, then wrapped her in his own coat and set her sideways in the saddle. She slumped forward, breath misting against the leather. He walked beside her, leading the horse up into the hills, past the frozen creek and through the thick pines. Above them, ravens flitted like black prayers in the wind. The cabin appeared at the edge of the woods, buried in snow, its roof sagging with years. Inside, the fire was still alive barely. He laid her on the bed, his wife's old bed, the one no one had touched since June. Callahan dyed a coughing blood into the sheets. He closed his eyes for a moment, then turned to work. Snowmelt into the kettle. Fire stoked, cloth boiled. He peeled back the fabric from her thigh. The wound was angry, raw, a jagged tear likely from a fall onto stone. It hadn't begun to rot yet. That would change if he waited. She winced as he cleaned it. But she didn't cry out. Just gritted her teeth and stared at the ceiling with the hollow defiance of someone who'd lost too much to fear pain anymore. He threaded the needle, the same one he'd used on saddle straps, and stitched the wound with slow, sure hands. When it was done, he left a tin cup of water, a piece of bread, and a folded rabbit pelt beside her. Then he took the chair by the fire and sat down with his back to her. The flames cracked, casting long shadows over the floor. Outside, the wind rose again. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did she. But for the first time in a long time, Samuel Callahan didn't feel alone. And somewhere inside the storm, something had shifted. Something had begun. The morning after the storm still roared like a beast with no end in sight. Snow clawed at the cabin walls as though it resented the warmth inside. The fire had died sometime in the early hours, and Samuel Callahan stirred the coals with steady hands, coaxing heat back into the room as light bled through the cracks in the shuttered windows. Outside was all white and gray, a world without color. Inside the cabin felt like a place caught between breaths. Aiyana lay under the quilt, her face pale lips, cracked dark hair fanned across the pillow like tangled ink. For a moment, Samuel wasn't sure she was still alive, but then her chest rose and fell barely. It was that softness that undid him more than any scream ever could. Something about the way she clung to life without asking permission reminded him too much of his wife June in those final days. He hadn't spoken a full sentence to another soul in almost a year, but he heard the echo of her words now in that room, as though her ghost lingered in the spaces between boards, whispering, urging him not to turn away this time. He moved quietly through the cabin, boiling snow-grinding bark into a paste of rinsing linen in hot water. His hands remembered the rhythm of care, though his heart had tried to forget. He didn't touch her again until he was ready, kneeling beside the bed, gently turning her leg to clean the wound. She moaned, then, soft but sharp, and her hand twitched away from his touch. "You should have left me," she said, voice raw and brittle as thawed wood. "I've left too many," he replied. She turned her head and looked at him fully, for the first time. There was something in her eyes that reached back across centuries, defiance, exhaustion, and a kind of dignity you couldn't steal even with a gun. "Aiyana," she said. "Samuel." The silence that followed wasn't awkward or cold. It was thick with what couldn't be said yet. Like two people speaking different languages but understanding one another anyway. He offered her water. She drank slowly, lips barely parting. When he moved to refill the cup, she whispered, "Why?" "Because breathing shouldn't be the thing that gets you killed." She said nothing after that, only nodded and turned her face toward the window, where the wind howled against the frost-blurred glass. By afternoon, the fever took hold. Samuel wrapped her in blankets and sat beside her, watching as sweat beaded on her forehead and soaked the sheets. She murmured in her language fragments of dreams, or memories spilling into the room like drifting snow. He didn't understand the words, but he listened all the same. That night, he didn't sleep. Just sat by the fire, carving a cane from a pine branch. He didn't know if she'd ever walk without pain, but he knew she'd try. She seemed like the kind of person who did things not because they were easy, but because they mattered. In the days that followed, they began to speak more, though rarely in full sentences. She told him about the child she saved a settler's daughter burning with fever. The tribe said she had betrayed them, had shared sacred medicine with outsiders. Her own kin turned their backs, and she walked into the snow with nothing but her shawl and her name. Samuel didn't offer sympathy, he just listened, and when she paused, he placed the nearly finished cane into her hand. "It's not much," he said. "It's more than anyone else gave me." By the third morning, she tried to sit up on her own. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes were sharp again. He helped her sip tea, a bitter mix of bark root, and the last spoon of honey in the cabin. She grimaced. "That's terrible," she muttered. He smiled. "You're healing. Ugly things tend to help." She chuckled softly, then winced. "Don't make me laugh. It hurts." But he saw it, the light faint and flickering, but present. That evening, while he was outside splitting kindling, she began to hum. The sound carried through the open window, low and rhythmic, like something older than language. When he came back inside, she stopped. "Don't," he said. "It reminded me of something I didn't know I'd forgotten. My mother sang it when she sewed wounds. She said, 'Pain listens when you give it music.' Maybe it listens better than people do." Their silences after that were different, less guarded, more shared. He began to read aloud in the evening short passages from an old almanac. She listened, head resting against the wall, eyes closed, but awake. Some nights she asked questions about the stars he named or the birds he tracked. One afternoon she asked, "This land yours?" He looked out the window. "We're just visitors. The land was never ours." She seemed to like that answer, or maybe it hurt her less than most truths. They built a rhythm. Quiet mornings, long silences, slow healing. She marked the days with notches on the doorframe. He started a new row of firewood without being asked. She folded linens that hadn't been touched in years. And all the while, neither of them said the one thing that hung in the air, that sometimes being broken is just the beginning of becoming whole. By the seventh day, her fever was gone, her voice steadier, her body thin but stronger. She walked to the window on her own and stared out at the white horizon. He stood beside her, not speaking. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "Neither do I, but you don't mind the not knowing. Not if someone's standing next to me." She nodded slowly, and for the first time she reached for his hand, not to hold it, not to claim it, just to feel that it was there. And in that simple touch, something broke open between them, not a wound, not sorrow, something like peace. The thaw came slowly, not in bursts, but in steady drips that traced the eaves of Samuel's cabin. The snow was still there, packed deep in the woods and along the roads, but the wind had lost its bite. It wasn't warmth, not yet, but it was the promise of it. Aiyana walked better now. The cane helped, but she no longer leaned on it with the desperation of days before. The scar on her leg was healing, red and rough, but closed. She swept the floors, chopped carrots with a dull blade, even lit the fire when he wasn't watching. Life was returning in small, ordinary ways. But peace, Samuel had learned, had a price. It came first in whispers, the kind you can't quite hear but feel crawling along your spine. At the general store, Grady, the railman, mentioned her by name, not her real one, but the one folks used when they were afraid. That Apache woman. They said she was trouble, that no good could come from harboring someone whose people once rode under banners of war. Never mind that she'd been found half dead. Never mind that she had hurt no one. The next day the sheriff came. Monroe wasn't cruel, not openly, but his kind didn't need to be. His power was in the way he stood, with one hand near his holster, and the other on the past, clinging to old stories like they were scripture. "You're sheltering someone the town don't trust," he said, his boots wet with melted snow. "She hasn't done anything but survive." Samuel replied, "Sometimes that's enough to stir things up." Samuel didn't answer, just stepped aside and let the sheriff's words hang between them. He didn't have to fight. Silence, when wielded right, could cut sharper than any blade. That night, Aiyana stood at the window long after the sun had gone. The light from the fire lit only one side of her face, leaving the other in shadow. "I should go," she said quietly. "They'll come. Not just with questions. With fire." Samuel stirred the stew in the cast-iron pot, his eyes fixed on the slow swirl of broth. "Then we let them come. We answer with more than fear. I'm not asking you to protect me. I know. I'm asking you to let me leave." He turned then, and in his eyes was something softer than sorrow, resolve born from 1,000 losses. "You're already home." She didn't argue. The next day passed in quiet. Aiyana harvested snowmelt into jars, labeling them with neat letters. Samuel fixed the door hinge, though it didn't need fixing. They didn't speak of the sheriff or the rumors or the threat, but they prepared all the same. And when the first torch appeared that evening, they weren't surprised. It came flickering down the road like a false star carried by someone whose name they both knew. Grady. Behind him, 5 others. Not quite a mob, but enough to feel like one. They didn't shout. They didn't rush. They came like judgment already decided. Samuel stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed, shotgun leaning against the wall behind him, but untouched. He didn't need it to be seen. "She's still here then," Grady said. "She is. Town's talking, Sam. They're afraid. They should be afraid of what they become if they drive away someone who's only ever tried to live." Grady shifted uncomfortable. Another man, unfamiliar, stepped forward. "My sister died last spring. Raids out west. I lost 2 cousins. What if she was part of it?" Samuel's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She wasn't. And even if she had been, she's not now. All that's left in her is breath and bruises, and a name no one tried to learn. Just then, Aiyana stepped onto the porch. Her braid was long dark. The coat she wore still Samuel's. She held no weapon, only her presence. "I was cast out by my own," she said, voice steady. "I saved a child not of my blood, and they called it betrayal. I've healed, I've mended, and still I'm hunted. If fear alone is proof of guilt, then none of you are innocent." Silence followed. It was the kind that made the air itself feel sharp. Then a voice rose, gentle but strong. Mrs. Halberd, the midwife. She stepped from the back of the group holding a jar. "She gave my grandson a tonic. Fever broke the next day. Maybe she's not what we thought." Grady frowned. "She's still not one of us." Samuel stepped forward. Then, "Maybe it's time we stop deciding who counts as us." The group wavered. The torches lowered slightly. They didn't leave all at once, but one by one they turned boots, crunching in retreat. When the last man disappeared into the dark, Samuel exhaled. Aiyana stepped down from the porch and stood beside him. "They'll come back, probably, but you didn't let them take me." "No," he said, "and I won't." She looked up at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because I know what it feels like to be seen only as a warning, never as a person. And I'm tired of watching kindness be punished." They went inside. The fire burned low. The stew had gone cold, but the cabin, for the first time in a long time, felt like it might survive what came next. Some mornings still came bitter, the kind of cold that slipped past the skin and found its way into the hollows of memory. But now the cold no longer ruled. Smoke curled from the chimney in soft, steady spirals. It smelled of pine and pepper root, of broth and warm hands. The cabin that once sat in silence now breathed with the presence of two people who had stopped trying to forget where they came from. Aiyana had stopped using the cane. It stood by the hearth like a retired sentinel, proof of pain endured and overcome. She moved through the house with quiet confidence, sweeping dust from corners, folding linens with careful fingers. Her steps no longer echoed in the stillness, but blended with it. Samuel noticed the way she touched things now, not as a guest, but as someone who had decided to stay. Her shawl hung beside his coat. Her dried herbs lined the shelf beside flour and salt. A wooden bowl she had carved sat on the table, filled with pine cones. Aiyana's presence wasn't loud, but it rooted deep, like frost when it settles slow into wood, claiming without shouting. Outside, the snow melted in uneven patches. Birds returned first, the brave kind. Chickadees. Jays. One morning, she opened the door to a rabbit chewing at the roots beneath the porch. She didn't scare it away, just watched until it hopped back into the thicket. They had planted onions. It was her idea. Samuel had never gardened much. His world had been about surviving, not growing. But Aiyana said, "This land wants to remember what's good." So they dug into the half-frozen soil, breaking clumps and scattering seed. They didn't speak during the planting. They didn't need to. Each day brought small rituals. She sang when she swept. He sharpened his knives not because he needed to, but because he liked the sound. They cooked together salt pork, bitter-root cornbread from an old tin recipe nailed to the pantry wall. Aiyana cleaned the cast-iron skillet with ashes and snow humming under her breath. Samuel built a second chair for the porch. She didn't mention it when she found it waiting the next morning. They began marking time differently, not with calendars but with what returned. Birds, a patch of moss, the first shoots of green. She carved notches in the doorframe, but not for days survived. For days shared. Then, just when the world had begun to feel safe, it came. The cry. A voice young, desperate, ripped through the trees like a warning. Samuel was out back stacking kindling. Aiyana opened the door, first heart pounding. A boy, no older than 12, stumbled into the yard. His coat was torn, his face streaked with panic and mud. They took her, he gasped. My sister. A wagon, men with guns, down past the ridge, said they'd sell her. He collapsed at the steps. Samuel had already loaded the shotgun. No words were needed. Aiyana threw on her coat, tied her braid in one twist, and mounted the horse behind Samuel. The boy climbed up too, gripping the saddle horn, his breath sharp with fear. They rode fast. The trail was slick branches clawing at their faces, but Samuel didn't slow. He followed the boy's directions through the darkening woods, past the old creek bed and the hollow where snow still lingered. When they reached the ridge, they saw smoke. A wagon sat in a clearing, its canvas flapping in the wind. 3 men lounged nearby. One stood on watch. Another leaned close to the rear laughing. Then came the sound, a scream, high, terrified, a sound that cracked something inside. Samuel didn't wait. He dismounted, shotgun steady. "Stay here," he told Aiyana. She didn't. He stepped into the clearing, let her go. The men turned. One reached for his weapon. Samuel fired. The man dropped hard. Another scrambled and fled. The third grabbed a girl from the wagon, a girl barely 10. Her face bruised, her wrists bound. Aiyana was already moving. She took Samuel's rifle, aimed, and fired. The shot was clean. The man fell. The girl collapsed into Aiyana's arms. She didn't scream anymore, just shook. Aiyana wrapped her in the shawl that once saved her from freezing. When Sheriff Monroe arrived, he said nothing for a long time. Just stared at the scene. 2 dead men, 1 girl saved. "What happened here?" he asked. Samuel answered without blinking. Justice. The sheriff nodded. No threats, no warnings, just a nod. Then he rode off. That night the girl and her brother slept in the bed once occupied by Samuel's past. He and Aiyana sat near the fire. She held a mug of broth but didn't drink. "You didn't let them take me," she said. "You didn't ask me to." "But I stayed, you did." She looked into the fire. "I used to think healing meant forgetting. Now I think it means remembering differently." He nodded. "I used to think peace was quiet. Now I think it's someone's breath beside yours when the wind rises." She reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. "I don't know if I'm healed," she whispered. "Neither am I, but we're here, we are." Outside, the frost cracked and melted. Inside, the fire glowed like something reborn. In that moment, nothing else mattered, not who they'd been, not what the town thought, not even the fear of tomorrow. All that mattered was the warmth between their palms and the roots they had quietly laid beneath the frost. The snow didn't vanish all at once. It retreated like an old ghost, slow, stubborn, lingering in the shadows, even as the world around it warmed. March crept in with a hesitant kind of hope, and the forest no longer screamed in the wind. It whispered. The days stretched longer. The firewood stack grew shorter, and inside Samuel Callahan's cabin time slowed, not from hardship, but from something gentler shared breath. Small rituals, the quiet rhythm of two lives no longer lived alone. Aiyana walked with ease now. The scar on her leg faded to a pale memory. She braided her hair in the morning sunlight, humming songs that belonged to older generations. Samuel built a shelf for her herbs beside the stove. She organized them by purpose, pain fever, sleep clarity. He learned the names, sometimes repeating them under his breath like they were spells. They cooked side by side. She taught him to grind dried seeds into powder, to steep birch bark for fever, to listen to the water when it boiled, not just see the bubbles. He showed her how to skin a rabbit clean, how to sharpen a blade with rhythm, how to read the sky and know when snow would fall again. They didn't speak often, but when they did, it was never wasted. Each night, Samuel lit the lanterns. First, the one by the fire, then the second near the door. That second lantern hadn't been touched in years, not since June passed, but now it burned again, its light casting a warm halo on the walls that once echoed only with silence. Then one morning, Aiyana was gone. The door was ajar. Her shawl missing. So was her pouch of herbs. Samuel stood in the doorway, holding the morning's fresh kindling in his hands, the warmth bleeding from his fingers. She hadn't left a note. No sound, no farewell. Just absence. He saddled the horse in silence. Her trail wasn't hard to follow. He knew the shape of her steps now, the way she leaned into the wind. Pine needles told the story. A branch moved where it shouldn't have. A rock bore her print. Hours passed. He found her near the ridgeline where the trees bent low and the sky widened into forever. She sat on a fallen log, knees drawn to her chest, her braid loose and wild. The wind pulled at her hair. She didn't turn when he approached. "I thought you might have gone west," he said. She shook her head. I walked toward what I feared, not away. He didn't speak, just tied the reins to a low branch and sat beside her. "I needed to remember who I was before I was cast out," she said. "Before I was marked a traitor for healing, for showing mercy." He looked down at his hands. "I watched my wife die. I carried her through snow thinking I could outrun death. I was wrong. I'm sorry," she whispered. "I thought I had more time." "I think time doesn't care what we thought," she said. They sat in silence. Not the kind that crushed, but the kind that listened. Then the woods stirred. A boy, barefoot trembling, burst through the trees. no more than 10 eyes wide with terror. "They're coming," he gasped. "Men. 5 or 6. Took my sister, said they'd sell her." I ran. Samuel rose, already loading his shotgun. Aiyana took the reins, the boy climbing onto the saddle horn. His breath came in gasps. The sun had begun to fall, shadows stretching long and thin. They found the wagon at dusk. Smoke curled above it. 3 men stood near the fire. Another leaned into the canvas, laughter rising. Then a scream, sharp, young. Samuel stepped out, let her go. One man spun with a rifle. Samuel didn't hesitate. The shot echoed. He dropped. Another ran. A third grabbed the girl. Aiyana moved before the man could. She took Samuel's rifle, steady hands, one shot. It was enough. The girl collapsed into her arms, sobbing. Aiyana wrapped her in her own shawl. When the sheriff arrived, he stared at the seen bodies, blood and mercy. "What happened?" he asked. Samuel looked him in the eye. What needed to? The sheriff nodded. Nothing more. Back at the cabin, the girl slept beside her brother. Aiyana and Samuel sat near the fire shoulders, touching. She held his hand. "I would have stayed," she said. "If you'd asked. I didn't know how. You didn't have to. I knew." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you think ashes remember the shape of fire?" He looked at their joined hands. "I think they wait for it." Outside, the wind quieted. Inside, the second lantern burned long into the night, and something like peace, hard-earned and held close, refused to flicker out. At the heart of every wilderness story lies the unspoken truth that the land, though harsh and unrelenting, often knows better than we do how to heal the broken. The tale of Samuel Callahan and Aiyana is not just about 2 people brought together by chance and circumstance, but a deeper story about grief, redemption, and the quiet endurance of the human spirit. It begins in the cold, a silence sharpened by loss and loneliness, and ends in firelight, in the kind of warmth that doesn't roar, but glows. Steady. Earned. Samuel was a man already weathered by sorrow, whose heart had built high walls after watching love slip through his fingers in the dead of winter. Aiyana arrived as a stranger nearly lost to blood and snow, carrying a different kind of pain, the shame of being cast out by those she had once saved. Together, they created something rare, not love at first glance, but trust, built layer by layer, day by day, until it became shelter in a world that had forgotten them. They learned to live again, not through grand gestures, but through quiet acts, stirring stew, mending fences, sharing silence. Every small routine became a language only they spoke. Every shared meal a ritual of choosing each other again. And though the world outside was still cruel and unforgiving, inside that cabin was a defiance stronger than any bullet, the choice to stay, to see one another, to not look away. Their story reminds us that healing doesn't come all at once. It's slow. It's hard. It stumbles. Sometimes it disappears altogether before returning in gentler form. For Aiyana, it meant remembering who she was before she was labeled a traitor. For Samuel, it meant lighting a lantern he had let stay dark for years. Together, they found not just peace, but the will to protect it, even at great cost. When a young boy arrived desperate and broken, Samuel and Aiyana didn't hesitate. They risked everything to save 2 children from falling into the hands of men who traded in fear and cruelty. That moment, marked not by vengeance but courage, showed that justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears a shawl, or a scar, or the quiet steadiness of a man who simply won't let the innocent suffer. By the end, they sat in the same room, where once only ghosts lingered, their hands clasped not in promise, but presence. They spoke softly, not to fill the space, but to affirm that they were still there, still choosing peace, still choosing each other. So, what can we learn from them? First, that pain is not the end of the story. Even in our darkest moments, there's a spark waiting to be kindled. It may take the form of a stranger's kindness or a second chance we didn't know we needed. Healing is not about erasing the past, but about rewriting our future with gentler hands. Second, that mercy is not weakness. Aiyana was hunted because she helped exiled, because she healed. But it was her mercy that ultimately saved others. In a world quick to judge, mercy stands as a radical, unshakable force. It reminds us that what we fear in others often reveals what we've neglected in ourselves. Third, that love is not always loud. It's not always wrapped in declarations or dramatic sacrifice. Sometimes it's a bowl of warm broth, a hand on your shoulder, a second lantern lit after years of darkness. In those small moments, the most profound connections are made. In today's world, rushed, divided, and often too loud for our own hearts to keep up, this story offers a simple invitation: slow down. Look around, listen. Sometimes what we need most is not to be saved, but to be seen. To be known not for what we've done wrong, but for what we still have the courage to do right. So, if Samuel and Aiyana's journey stirred something in you, let it stay. Let it warm a part of you that's been cold for too long. And let it remind you that even ashes long forgotten still remember the shape of fire. Thank you for riding with us through this story. If it touched you, if it made you feel something worth holding on to, please subscribe to our channel. Your support gives us the strength to bring more stories like this to life. Every share, every comment, every click, it keeps the fire burning. Until next time, stay brave, stay kind, and remember, some stories don't end. They become part of us.